And once I figured out like how to build the quote unquote perfect 3-lens trio set based upon whatever my hero lens is, that's when I just started purging everything. I've spent the past 6 months just getting rid of so much gear. The whole point is not to encourage you to buy into a specific brand or a certain manufacturer of lenses. I don't care about that. The whole point of today's video is to talk about the field of view within your mind's eye. Now that may sound like some true hippy-dippy bullshit, but the reality is that we all view the world differently.
Like your TV show, what is it called?
Dark times. So I'm sure you've all heard the cliche, take 20 image makers, whether they be cinematographers, videographers, or still, if you put them on the top of a hill, they're all gonna come down with very unique individual images that they captured. And that's because we each have a different way that we view the scene, expressing your unique vision of the world. And you can't do that until you figured out what field of view you're seeing that world in. So you're probably sitting there right now going, what the hell is Justin going on about today? I think it's so important to figure out what your standard focal length is to you. And it's gonna be unique to everyone. We all have our own standard focal length in our mind's eye. It's just the way it is. The lens set that we're gonna build today is gonna be truly unique to you. And if done right, you really will only ever use these 3 lenses 90% of the time, I can guarantee it. I've only been shooting for 7 years. During those 7 years, I have went through 8 different sets of lenses for cinematography use. And that doesn't include lenses that I use for photography, okay? So it's 2 different things. That's a lot of lenses. And I was one of the guys who's like, I gotta have them all, right? It's like Pokemon, you gotta collect them all. And that's ridiculous. Very rarely did I use more than 4 of those lenses ever. So many of them just sit in the case. And that's why I'm really trying to make this video to help you guys save some money, help you guys save some time and energy, and get your little 3-lens set and just start going to work. And what I call the first lens of the set is the hero lens. So for the longest time, the first 3 years of practicing cinematography, I was consistently trying to make the 28mm my hero lens, my main focal length, my standard focal length, when in reality, I was hurting my work because it wasn't actually how I was seeing the scene in my head. If I'm sitting there trying to compose a shot and my internal vision is not a 28 field of view, I'm not acknowledging my inner eye, my inner true field of view of how I view the world. This is so important because what happens is I go, okay, let's throw the 28 on. The whole time now I'm trying to make the shot adapt to this focal length that I've chosen when it has nothing to do with the field of view that I'm naturally seeing it as while I'm just standing there in real time. And this corresponds to a lot of stuff, even to lighting, right? When you're lighting a scene, so many times we get caught up in the technology and we're letting the technology dictate to us the lighting, right? Because we want to look at the screen, we want to go to Video Village. Sometimes all you have to do is like step back and just look at it in real time. Just look at it in the reality of what it is. And then when I started shooting on Leica rangefinder cameras a couple years back, I loved that I didn't have to rely on the screen. And that really made me fall in love with the rangefinder window. It challenges you to compose a scene without having to rely on technology. It's so important to figure out what your hero focal length is. And once you figure that out, you're gonna go, damn, finally my work is making sense, right? What you see in your head is gonna be exactly what you see on the screen every single time. You started with the most simple ingredient. Choose the right focal length for your unique vision. Everyone says, oh, the 50mm is the standard focal length because it's the standard focal length. Oh no, you'd be like Joel Meyerowitz. No, the 35 is the standard focal length because it's most matched to our vision. Well, that's for those artists. That's for them. There's some people out there where their natural field of vision is a 90mm, right? We can't sit there and tell them, oh, that's not right. Well, how do we know? We're not in their brain. But if you want to elevate your work and really match what you see in real life to what is being presented on the screen, the key first ingredient is choosing the focal length that matches what you're seeing, because otherwise you're going to be fighting against it. Remind you, I'm talking to you as someone that kept repeatedly choosing the 28mm for 3 years and blaming it on everything else. When finally it was like, no, it's the lens, dude, it's the focal length. And as soon as I realized that I see the world in a much narrower field of view, everything started to click a little better for me. It's very simple to practice this without a camera. Okay, so what I have in my pocket right here, this is very simple. This is a very inexpensive director's viewfinder. I'll leave some links to these down below if I find a good one online, okay? You can set this to whatever aspect ratio you're shooting on, whether it's, Super 35, whether it's anamorphic or it's Academy or it's Super 16, whatever format you're shooting on. And you can just walk around, and you don't even need to bring a camera with you. You can walk around your neighborhood, walk around your favorite city, and you can just walk around and start. It's that simple. It's like a little periscope. And all you're doing is trying to match what your mind's eye is focusing on in the scene to the field of view. And the beauty of this is you don't know what focal length you're on until you turn it over and look at it. It's a great way to discovering what your mind's eye is seeing. That's one way to figure out what your true standard focal length is to you. There's apps. You can use Artemis or like Cartage, those director viewfinder apps. The one thing that I worry about with those, though, it is introducing more technology. We want to try to make it as organic as possible. For me, also, it was a lot of just noticing my own patterns. I've went through some amazing, beautiful Leica M lenses. Most of those I've talked about here on the channel. And this little crappy, inexpensive 40mm is still the one I always choose to use. I chose to use this over the King of Bokeh lens. That lens is like revered through history and time as one of the best Leica lenses of all time. And I always still chose this 40mm. Even though I know it is kind of not as quirky, it's not as beautiful, it's not as wonderful characteristics, I didn't care about any of that. All I cared about was matching the field of view to what's in my head to the image I'm trying to create, right? And so that's the whole point of what I'm talking about. Even when I got my first Sony camera, my first full-frame Sony camera was the A7S III, and the first lens I got for that is literally the lens I'm still using and shooting on right now today. I'm shooting this on a 40mm f2.5 Sony G lens. Noticing these patterns in yourself, you'll realize like, oh, why am I always using this particular focal length? Not even aware or thinking about it. It's just the lens that you're always grabbing. I've never chose to grab the 40mm. I just grab it without even thinking about it. So that's another thing where you could figure out what your hero lens is, just becoming more aware of what you're naturally already gravitating towards. That's how I felt on the 40mm as my hero lens. But what I find most unique about that lens, a 40mm field of view, is it's a perfect hybrid between a 35 and a 50. Like, why waste your money on both the 35 and a 50 when you could just have a 40? Right? That was originally my original inclination of leaning towards the 40mm. But more and more, I found myself just constantly using it. So that's why I just kind of got lucky when building my newest set of lenses, is that Nisi, they have just added a 40mm to their set. That's just perfect. I mean, it's just perfect for me because this is my go-to focal length. So it just was, I guess, call it serendipitous that I recently did a project with Nisi. How the rep from Nisi called it, I took the Athena tuned out for coffee, right? So again, if you missed that, I'll leave a link below. But once you have your hero lens, it's very simple after this. You could almost call this your desert island set. What do we need on the long end? Well, times by 2. What do you need on the wide end? Cut it in half, right? So now we have 40 as our hero, 80 as our long, and 20 as our wide. Now here's where we get into some issues. Whatever your hero lens is may in itself dictate what brand or lens manufacturer you have to go for. Like for the guys out there that actually do have the natural field of view vision of a 28, and 28 is your hero lens and you know that, I think even for you guys, you're gonna be a little limited on what lenses you can choose. And this isn't really important for photography world, but in cinematography, it is kind of important for consistency of colors and everything and shape and size when building your cinematography lens set. So over 28, it is a little difficult because people have kind of gotten away from using a 28mm for their cinema lenses. So you may have to go for more like cinemod, like vintage lenses, which is not a bad thing at all. I mean, one of the best 28s, in my opinion, is the 28 f2, the Hollywood, the contact Zeiss, a lens that I used to own. The problem of going 40, 80, 20 is that Nisi do not make an 80mm and they do not make a 20mm. However, I'm not going to go, okay, I gotta find the perfect set that matches this, because that to me is a little crazy. I would rather make the other two work around my hero. Because again, that's why it's called the hero. It's your unique field of view. Keep that. Don't give that up for anything. For me, 40 is going to be a difficult one to find. So I'm going to make the other two adapt because I care most about keeping my hero lens consistent, because I know this is the lens that I'm actually going to be using about 70% of the time, right? If you choose it wisely, right? That's what I mean. It's really important to figure out what your field of view is. When you're talking in terms of full frame field of view, once you drop below a 24mm, you are now in what is known as ultra wide angle, or what I refer to as specialty lenses. Every millimeter difference is a huge difference. There's a very big difference between a 28 and a 24. There's a big difference between a 24 and a 20. There's a big difference between a 21 and a 16, right? It's like, I could go on and on, right? Every millimeter is a drastic difference. Whereas on the other end of the spectrum, on the tighter end, an 85 compared to a 100 is not that big of a difference. If you moved 15 millimeters on the wide end, that's a huge difference, drastic difference. That's what I'm talking about. On the wide end, you do need to be very careful about what you choose. And for my guys, where your natural field of view is, if your hero lens is a 28 or a 24, well then whatever you choose as your wide is already going to be a extreme wide angle specialty lens. But that makes sense because it's going to be paired so well with your hero lens. I mean, do you see how versatile of a set you're building? A 40, a 24, and 85, that is the perfect trio lens set for me. Even if it's not catered to you, you could still sit there and identify and go, yeah, that's a pretty decent range. If your hero field of view is a 28, your wide is probably going to be like a 15 or a 16 probably. And then on the other end, you know, you're going to be looking at what, like a 60 mil, 28, 58, and a 16. And even then you go, wow, that's a pretty badass range. In the world of photography, it's a lot easier. We don't have to worry about consistency in colors and every size as much. I was really able to cater it exactly how I want it to be. I got to stay with my hero field of view, so the 40 is not going to change. But for the long end, I go for the 75, this Voltlander 2.5 APO. I absolutely love this Voltlander lens. These are some images that I've captured with the 75 mil. And then on the wide end, I didn't go wider than 28. So I used this old school Voltlander aspherical Ultron, the f1.9, the version 1 Ultron. To me, this is just a beautiful set for documentary photography. If you wanted to spice it up a little bit, specifically for my cinematography guys, I would add 2 more specialty lenses. In this case, if you are someone like me, living in the 24, 40, 85 world, I would throw in like a 15 mil, and which I do have. I do have this, I used my 15 mil f4.5. It's a little Voltlander lens. I use it all the time for cinematography, and I just loved using that lens because it's a specialty lens. I like to use wide angle lenses for how I think they should be used for cinematic effect. Anytime you go wide, you gotta go close. And what beautiful way to capture all of these guys on the roof, show the environment, show the roof. Everything from front to back is in focus. It's very, I call it like a Beastie Boys effect. It's a specialty lens, right? So I always have that in my case. It's a very tiny little lens, and you just never know when you're gonna need it. I absolutely love it. And the fact that the depth of field is so insane, like everything from like half a meter to infinity will be in like acceptable focus at like f8. So you can just set it and forget it. You don't need to worry about focus polar or nothing. You just run around on the gimbal and it's just great. For the final specialty lens, which is still only a 5 lens set, but it would be a macro lens. I'm all about detail shots when shooting short film or narrative work, and details is where it's at. And your life will be so much easier if you have a true dedicated macro lens. And I use this Leica R60 mil 2.8 macro, and I actually have the life size 1:1 adapter that goes with it. It's a beautiful lens. I've had it CLA'd, so it's renders really, really well. Now here's the flip side. If you're already someone that's already naturally living in the wide angle, for instance, my guys that where your hero lens is a 24 or 28, and so your wide is already an extreme wide, well then just go to the other end of the spectrum. Get yourself a nice telephoto option. Because if your hero lens is a 24, that means that your wide option is probably gonna be like a 15, maybe a 12 or something crazy. And then your long is still only gonna be like a 50. So if you want another specialty lens, a 4th lens, you already have your wides. You're not gonna, you're gonna go the other end, right? So then maybe you would choose like a 90 or maybe even 100. I love the 100 mil focal length. I really do. And, if you needed that, but I still don't think that you're going to rely on the specialty lenses that often. You're really only going to live with those 3 lenses that you chose 90% of the time. In my experience, you really are, because the other ones are specialty lenses. They're just that because they're special case use that are only going to get used 10% of the time. So you could literally start with those 3 focal lengths, whatever they are. Remember, you build them based around your hero lens, right? That's the first lens. Everyone always has to choose the first lens. So you got to go with your hero lens, and then you build around that. Times 2, divide by 2. It's an old photography trick, but it's just great for having a really well-rounded set of lenses. All right, let me know what you think of all that. I already did a video comparing the normal Athenas to the Athena Tune. I'll have a link to that down below. I'll have a link to the Gary Winogrand video down below. But I do think that I might put out another video where it's just like VO and comparing the footage, which will be a little bit different. It'll be longer segments because I shot a lot on both the normal Nisi Athenas and the Athena tuned. So it might be fun to just, sit back, have some VO, just kind of talk about the lenses while we observe what they're doing, because the differences are pretty rad and there's pretty night and day in my opinion. The tuned are amazing. As always, guys, thanks for checking in and hope you enjoyed it. Let me know your thoughts. We'll see you in the next one. Thank you. Thank you.
Doesn't matter who we are. What matters is our plan. No one cared who I was till I put on the mask.
I am cinema.